So a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today and deciding to spend the next hour with us. I will start with a quick overview of the format of this session before we move on to some introductions. So the first part of the webinar would be Luis's presentation, and then we have some time for Q&A and a discussion at the end. If you have any questions throughout the presentation or in the Q&A part, you can submit your question through the Q&A option, which should be somewhere at the bottom of the Zoom window, or by using the option raise your hand, and we will allow you to speak. So moving on to some short introductions. My name is Albena Krosteva. I am the head of growth at Zartis. And based out of Berlin. And we have Luis Massa, who is our speaker today, solutions architect at Zartis and logged in from near Barcelona, Spain. Luis has over 10 years of experience leading development teams and driving technological improvement across multiple international companies. His expertise lies in software solutions design, technical governance, developer experience, and stakeholder management. Luis focuses on bridging the gap between technology and business teams in order to drive success, and has done so for Zartis as well as many of our clients. Without further ado, I will at this stage pass on the floor to Luis for the presentation.
Thank you, Albena, and welcome everyone. And thank you all for attending to this session. So hopefully you find it interesting. And as Albena was saying, for several years, I've been involved in technical consultancy projects. And here in Zartis, I've had the chance to be part of the high-level consultancy teams. And well, one of the reasons consultancy projects are particularly interesting is the variety of scenarios and situations that I've had access to, and across time I've seen recurrent patterns that emerge and scenarios that are repeated once and again. And obviously the natural temptation is to extract general ideas and try to put focus on these. And today I'll be sharing some of the insights that I've collected along these projects and these experiences. So we'll try to cover the general, let's say, profile of the companies that typically we encounter, and then we'll go to the symptoms they find, which is what takes them to realize that they might need, well, help or insights from somewhere outside. And then we'll go into the common pitfalls that I find when I go and make more in detail assessment of the situation. Then typical diagnosis we find, and the common solutions that we normally try to take to address those issues. So, and then, well, some final notes. So typical scenario we find are companies obviously that are digital first products. Those are the ones that put more focus on the tech or the IT part. They normally have a successful business model, so they have a solid client base, and that's why they start worrying about improvements. And they're normally in the stage where they want to grow further. So they have the ambition to scale further, and they want to grow both their operations and obviously the number of clients, the portfolio of clients. So at this point, they realize that time to market begins to increase. So typically there's a situation where it starts getting uncomfortable, that the business, the throughput that the business expects starts to decrease in terms of features to deliver to production for the products. So they have the typically they have the feeling or the idea that small features take every time longer, inexplicably longer to go into production. the release cycles start getting longer as well, and the number of defects in the products begin to increase. Somehow, this obviously impacts the time to market, as well as important effort goes into troubleshooting these defects in the in the in the product. They also start losing control of the code, so the development teams start losing confidence. Sometimes they're afraid to actually modify the code base because they fear they're going to break it, or they're going to have impact somewhere else, unexpected impact somewhere else inside the software. And that goes down to find it challenging to increase the capacity, the development capacity. So at some point, we find very commonly that some of the companies, they really want to grow, they want, and some even start bringing more talent inside, but then they realize that it's hard to actually increase the throughput of delivery, and obviously increase the client base becomes challenging as well. So these are the symptoms they find, and that's the point where that they start feeling uncomfortable. And once you go there and start doing a more in-depth assessment, what we typically find are that teams are organized around technology or competence areas, so more like department-wise, the company. So you typically find, so for example, in some places you find that there's a front-end team, an API team, DBA team, these sort of teams which are more horizontal teams and are more focused on technology or competence areas, as I said before. And then you can also see very commonly that, especially in companies that are on the earlier stages of startup, that sometimes the CEO, the founders, remain with the responsibility over the product design and the roadmap. This is not usually a comfort zone for the classical, let's say, CEO at this stage, which tend to be people with more focus on creativity and vision, rather than more structured, organized ways of work and creating roadmap. And also, you can see very commonly that the product roadmap itself has been specifically driven by client customizations. It's something that you find usually that some companies are trying to pursue the software as a service model, but they end up with a software as a product model, in the sense that they end up with multiple products for multiple clients. And on the other side, they expect the benefits of, typically the financial and benefits of scaling a software as a service company model. So it's usually an issue found there. There is also, we find a lot that in some of these companies, there is a lack of technical voice at the highest level of the organization. It happens a lot for companies that start in a more traditional model, let's say, and not more like a tech company, which comes more on this software service way of structuring your company, business, etc. And technology has been gaining the influence or the importance, but hasn't been placed correctly in the chart, in the organization chart, let's say, of the company. And obviously, well, there are found important bottlenecks in the delivery pipeline. Typically, QA, for example, stands as an important bottleneck, the way we find it most commonly inside the delivery process. It's hard to structure, so it's very common pattern there. And as well, given that the number of defects in the products is increasing, well, but this doesn't help either. That the delivery pipeline remains smooth. On the more technical side, most common findings are the arch-known monolithic architecture. So the complexity obviously causes bottlenecks in the release pipeline, resulting in these releases that the companies tend to complain about from the beginning. Most of the times, the software architectures has organically started to mirror the department structure. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the Conway's law, where the software basically takes the structure of the organization that creates it. It's only natural, let's say, and that ends up with this structure in the architecture of the software. And that also comes with these horizontal slices that get created in the best case, where it's not complete monolith, or as we said before, if you end up with a DBA department or DBA team with API team, cross API team, front-end team, then you end up with the software with that exact structure, and then you have like huge APIs and which sit on top of the huge database and the front end. So it's like you have more horizontal slices in the software, in the same way the company or the organization is structured. It's also quite common to find at this point, or with companies that have this scenario, to find little or no DevOps culture at all. So there is little or no automation in the IT infrastructure management, and the operations teams, sometimes called the systems teams, is siloed, totally siloed from the development teams, and creating these strong impedance there. On the QA side, you find that typically there is mainly manual or reactive QA approach. So it's more a quality control approach than quality assurance approach. So it's more controlling defects rather than preventing defects and focusing on quality. So it's a very common pattern there. And there is normally little or no technical debt management either, not formally anyway, and not accounted for, the technical debt that is being generated. And in a more general, we can see the lack of technical governance or no clear ownership of the system architecture as a whole. This is what normally we find when we go there and, let's say, scratch the surface of the first claimed situations or issues the company normally complain about. And then in general, what we find at the core of all these scenarios are companies that are in specific stages of the growth. So we find sometimes that there are companies that are just running an early stage startup model that just won't scale beyond that. And normally here it's not the worst case, because when this is the situation, what happens is the company, before making the big jump into the growth or into their scaling model, they just realize that their model won't support it, and then start on this journey of assessing and trying to figure out how to do that. Some of the times we find companies that have just jumped into that and they're already growing. They started growing their teams. They started growing their client base, and they have started making commitments of delivery, etc. And then they realize on the ground, let's say, that it's not going to happen easily, and they need to make important changes in the mindset. Some of the times there are companies, as I said before, that started as, let's say, traditional companies in the sense of the product offering they had. And at some point they realized, they discovered the benefits of the scaling out model rather than the growing model, and they decided they wanted to go for that, like the path of the technical companies that we see a lot of these days. And they decide to give more importance and put technology at the core, and that obviously needs, there's a switch to be made there to put technology at the core of the business. And basically what happens is that business is growing or wants to grow, and the technology base just needs to catch up because it's falling behind, which is natural on the other hand. So what we try to do in some of these cases is to address these issues from all the sides, let's say. So I try to see on the strategic side, try to see on the architecture side, DevOps, QA, and gather and try to organize all the project around these work streams. So, for example, on the strategy side, one of the important key things is to organize the teams and the projects around the product. And when I say the product, I mean the product features. So it shouldn't be the technology itself or the competences, as we were saying before, or departments. In case of, if you look from the organization point of view, what drives the structure of both company and software, which both will have the same, will tend to have the same, as we said before. So the idea is to have them all organized around the product features. These are what later on will be mapped to bounded context or subdomains, which we will see in a moment, more in the sense that domain-driven design approach for the software architecture talks about it or defines them, the bounded context. This also allows that teams that need to be multidisciplinary and are autonomous and have an end-to-end delivery pipeline to minimize dependencies among them. So this structure more on the vertical slices rather than the horizontal slices are the one that allows for more speed in these cases. Obviously, these teams, what the goal of this structure is to minimize dependencies among the teams. And when the dependency needs to be there, because obviously there needs to be dependencies there, then well-defined interfaces need to be set there. So another important aspect is to define engineering and standard principles to work over. This is important because this is the basis of being able to scale the technical team or the technical ownership team, the technical leadership team, without growing the team proportionally. So if you need to scale out your development capacity, your development teams, and you don't necessarily need, you don't want to have to scale your technical leadership team linearly with that. So the way to do that is to create clear standards and principles that everyone understands and everyone is able to embrace and to be able to make decisions based on those. There is an important thing which seems like obvious sometimes, but it's important to highlight, which is it's key to focus on the operational excellence. That happens at all levels in business or in a company, in an organization, and it also stands for the IT department. So one great idea to be able to so the operational excellence is what drives the consistent realization of the vision of the product eventually, and ultimately of the company as well. So it needs to be put a lot of focus there. And in our case, obviously, we refer to the IT operations. So And finally, embracing the agile mindset in this case. So it's been seen in the last years of the IT industry that the agile principles work very well for these environments, and they have increased the product delivery, the features delivery of the products. That is a fact. So far, that's probably the best approach that is known to be able to accomplish that speed that the business is asking for. And basically, the agile, it doesn't need to be put in place like the agile by the book, but but we do need to focus on the key aspects there, which is basically stream of value and iterative approach to shorten the feedback loops. And in the case of the architecture, we'll put it with what they call the just enough architecture. So being able to move fast and focus on the value. These will all be matched very well with the structure we were saying before about the teams around the product. So from the product point of view, as we saw before, it's quite common to find that the CEO or the head of the organization remains with the responsibility of defining the product. And most of the time, especially in early stages, it's done in an ad hoc way. So there is a moment when you need to make the switch and start scaling, that you need to appoint a head of product to formally build and manage a product roadmap. Also, on the other side, we need that the product offering needs to be consistent with the expectations, and this comes with sometimes we've seen that the expectation and the intent somehow is to go for a software as a service model. Let's recall that most of the scenarios we see are digital product companies. So sometimes, and most of the time, a lot of times we've seen they want to go for a software as a service product, but then they lose the sense of the model and start customizing on a per client basis, and end up with more like a model software as a product model they call, which is a valid model as well, but it has characteristics. There's a different and usually more complex support model, and the curve of scaling or growth curve is usually smoother than the one expected. So it needs to be made a decision there on what the model is going to be and set the right expectations for that one. On the architecture side, well, the idea is to go for microservices with a domain-driven design approach. We have other webinars about this subject. So if anyone is interested, feel free to browse our website on our YouTube channel, and you should find it there. It's quite interesting actually. And the idea here is to break the monolith, as we all know, and we've been doing in the industry for the last years, breaking monoliths and decoupling the components in the system. So basically, the software solution components should mirror the business context we said before. To understand the business and structure it, we go for, as the domain-driven design approach explains, the goal here is to be able to support and manage the components independently, so they can be developed independently, deployed independently, executed, and scaled independently. So that's the main idea behind the microservices approach. Also, data management benefits from this structured approach because, well, technology can be decided specifically for the purpose of each service, and also the teams have are able with smaller and controlled domain context to be able to understand better fully the data model, which it's very typical to find company with a huge database, and there is no single person in the whole company that understands all of that. So it's quite challenging, the situation that is found nowadays. There is also the event-driven architecture. This is another approach which is not it's not exclusive with the microservices. It's probably more orthogonal in the sense that that it is can be adopted also for microservices. People also speak about event-driven microservices and and that sort of architecture, but I'm sure you're probably aware of the multiple names of event-driven architecture. There's a conference out there by Martin Fowler, I think, which is very interesting. And but the idea here is to focus on a higher level of decoupling. In this sense, time decoupling, because when we can decouple the system in multiple services, but then you have your time decoupling as well, in the sense that, I mean, to improve resilience, in the sense that you can have one of the systems down and others still producing events and data, and the other will catch up once it's on because of this decoupling in time. So it also improves the resources consumption because it typically flattens the curve of consumption, rather than in the cases where the alternative was batch processing data, for example. And well, it's to reach another level of decoupling where it makes sense. So it's all something we also consider here. Another important idea we try to follow is whenever it's possible, go for a cloud native solution. So when we say cloud native, it's more like a platform as a service operational model. So there are multiple benefits of this approach, mainly operational. So the teams get rid of all the boilerplate plumbing, let's call it that, and can focus more on the issues that are more specific to the business. So typically, also these kind of services are better integrated with monitoring, and you have more services associated with it that come off the shelf with those. There's a fear here with the vendor lock, which is common as well, but the way I see it, if the only way to actually take leverage all the benefits the cloud offers is to just make that decision and lock yourself in a vendor. You can be totally not locked with any vendor and totally independent on that type, but then you need to implement pretty much everything. So I think it makes sense at some point, and in most cases, it makes sense to make a decision on one provider and lock yourself there. It will increase time to market and bring several operational benefits on your side. And there's also one thing we've seen quite commonly, which sometimes it happens in companies that have already started the journey into microservices. And it's very well known that one of the things we say about the microservices is the ability to mix multiple technology stacks. And a lot of companies have made the decision of using multiple technology stacks, but that's actually, obviously, that you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it, and most of the time you shouldn't do it. And it's very common that we find that companies can benefit a lot from harmonizing their technology, making the decision if you want to go for Microsoft technology, Java, .NET, etc., or if you want to go for Java, Amazon, etc. If you just harmonize your tech stack, it brings several benefits there as well. On the DevOps side, we mostly, obviously, encourage companies to embrace DevOps culture that brings all the benefits of automation, operational automation, mature observability monitoring solutions, and finally the end-to-end responsibility of the team along each vertical in the sense of the domain-driven design and the domain context. This is important because microservices bring complexity, and to be able to deal with this complexity and have the benefits, then you need to have a strong DevOps culture in place. On the QA side, adopting quality assurance is important rather than just quality control. It's something that is quite confused. It's quite commonly confused. So quality assurance culture goes more into the processes and preventing defects and affecting the software development lifecycle, while the quality control, we may call, is more reactive and product based and is just focused on detecting bugs. You need to have an effective automation strategy, so we can't all go and try to automate everything. So there needs to be balance there, and obviously the main idea is to shift quality and testing to the left. This is the very well known early fail early or fail fast idea. And finally, there's a technical governance. We try to establish a technical design authority on the technical governance side. So it's important to have ownership and governance. It's particularly important in the cases where companies outsource their development. So you have external teams developing, and then you need to have a safe model of ownership and governance in place. It's important here to highlight that if there's a temptation of these kind of teams to become a bottleneck, so it needs to be done with care and with the rights, and find the sweet spot of governance and agility, and the TDA being seen as an enabler, able to balance intentional and emergent design there. And obviously, finally, technical debt management. So technical debt isn't always avoidable, and actually it is a tactical decision to be made most of the time, but it's a liability and it needs to be accounted for. So also this wide technical governance approach, having a proper technical governance in place will allow for reuse into reuse services, framework, and cross-cutting concerns. They can all be extracted out sometimes or generalized somehow, and be put to the service of the development teams, so they can focus on the business and produce and increase the throughput, which is eventually the final goal. So as a final note, just to end, there's always a temptation of taking all the recommendations, suggestions you get, and there's always a temptation to think, okay, so this is how we should have started, but it's not always the case. So there are things, or there are points where it's important to focus from the beginning, because it's good and it's beneficial to get them right from start, but there are others that don't. So for example, from the beginning, it's important to set the right agile mindset. So if you go for a brand new project, you can start then getting on the agile mindset and focusing on the stream of value, iterative approach, short feedback loops, etc. It is important to have from the beginning. DevOps culture is important to have from the beginning. So automation of operational tasks, etc. QA culture as well, to setting up the right quality culture towards the processes that ensure quality rather than going after the defects. And in a maybe lower sense, the domain-driven design and bounded context, but in the sense that initially, some of the times, if you go from the very beginning, you're not clear, there's no way to know the business completely. So there are decisions that might change afterwards. But the structure needs to be put in place. So the business need to be conceived as a joint of bounded context, and they need to start being identified from the very beginning. But there are others that you don't need to rush into. So, for example, microservices architecture is probably not something that an organization that wants to build a product, a software product, wants to rush into. Most of the time, it's a good idea to start with the monolith and and go fast, because at low scale the monolith goes faster than microservices. So microservices just bring the benefits at that sweet spot where the monolith starts getting slow. So you don't want to rush into microservices architecture right from the beginning of a product. And also in the governance model. So the technical design authority responsibilities at early stages can be taken by development team, and probably favor emergent design over intentional design at these stages. So this governance process at the very beginning could probably more bring harm and slow development that it's not one needs. So at the early stages of product, time to market is just critical, and probably all the structure need to be sacrificed because of that. So as someone said, I read somewhere, I don't know who said, like, a small business is not a little big business. So there are changes in the structure that need to happen there, but also the other way around happen. So a little business is not a small big business. So when you want to start, you really want to start little and not go for the full structure. So, and well, this is pretty much it. I hope you found it useful. Now we can go into the questions, I'd say. Albina.
Thank you very much, Luis. That was very, very interesting. A very quick reminder to our audience, there are two ways you can submit questions. So one is by typing in your question in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. And the other one is also you can raise your hand and we'll give you the floor to speak. So we can give our audience a few minutes with the questions. The first question is actually coming in. Where do you start? Which is the most critical change to make first?
Where do you start? Well, there are two main areas when you want to go into transforming, or even from beginning to set up and start and kick off a product. To one line is the architecture of the software itself, which you need to define. That's what we spoke about, microservices and all that. But the other side is the framework of work. So all the processes, life cycle, and the culture, and that should be the one where you start. So the first thing to set up is the right culture in the teams and the right process in place, because that's where all the rest is standing on. So it's probably first go there.
Sounds good. There is a question that's very related to that. I think it's probably just a summary of what you said. So where does it make sense to start? First, readjust the teams according to the product and let the architecture flow from it, or redesign the architecture to fit the teams to it?
Sorry, again? I just got
So the question is, so where do you start? Again, it's a different audience member. They're asking, do you start with readjusting the teams according to the product and let the architecture flow from it? Or do you redesign the architecture and fit the teams to it?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing is, I would say, normally you want to get first the teams, but obviously, as it is implied, the architecture is what drives the team, because they both need to have the same structure. So you need to have like a first global view in the architecture, but I would say more on the functional side, more on the business domain side, and then define or identify the business domains and structure your team there. And then from there, iterate. So obviously these are two areas that need to move along, and they will change for sure. So key aspect is go there. But the first thing is you need to have a global view of how the architecture is going to go. And the first approach here, first iteration, let's say, is identifying the context, the bounded context, and from there, setting up the teams.
Very good. One more question. Also for technical governance, what is the lean process to start with that does not become a bottleneck?
There's normally the temptation, I would say, is to have, when you have, for example, an architecture team or an architect that needs to validate the solutions. That's that has proven to be quite challenging to be done without creating the bottleneck. So sometimes the inversion of control, I don't know if it's a principle of in the actual software, but the way I see it, it's more like that. It's like applying the same IOC concept to this management. And if the teams are experienced and are enough engaged, I think probably there needs to be a direct line between the product and the teams, and then the teams just pull uh, or push work to the architecture teams in that sense. So not having the TDA or architecture team or whatever it's called, that authority, not have it as a place where everything needs to go by, but just having the team to call out for them when there's a need. So most of the features you find when you're developing a product, it's just I don't know if you need to just add or modify or some endpoint, because you just need to add a couple of fields or something like that. You don't need to go through the whole pipe of validation. So I, for example, don't like much this validation concept, and I like it more like the teams receive the requirement. The teams sometimes, even if there's a change in the architecture, the teams just can propose the change, and then the important responsibility of the architecture team is to have the view. Doesn't mean that they need to decide what needs to be done. They just need to have the view and help in the decision. I think most of the time that helps in not having this bottleneck. That's quite a tricky one, actually.
Very good. Please feel free for anyone to submit any follow-up questions if you have any. One more question coming in. How do you usually address lack of skills in the teams with training or else?
So yes, there is training programs. It's very important to have proper training programs for the teams, so the teams have access to latest technologies, methodologies. We're thinking have everyone on board and understanding changes especially when there's an important transformation to be made. And but also one in one important strategy, one very useful strategy we have found is sometimes when there are teams that are working together for a very long time in a way that needs to be evolved somehow, then sometimes we call it injecting team members into those teams to help evangelizing, say like that, the new ways and where the processes need to go to. That helps a lot. So we have let's say the more formal theoretical um, the theory and formal theoretical trainings, but also having on the hands-on side, having external skilled team members that I get added to the team. That helps a lot. I think it's a quite a good tip, I would think.
Fantastic. One more question coming in. How long does it typically take to make the strategic transformation?
it takes, it obviously depends, yes, as in most questions, everything depends. And it depends, obviously, depends on how close the teams are, or the scenario is to the target, on one side. It depends also on how open are the teams to that change. It depends on the size of the company, the number of teams, and the size of the product, and that kind of things. But as we are saying in one of the questions before, the first thing to put in place is the culture and the processes. And normally, the typical scenario found out there, to be able to make this change, and then on top of that, changing the architecture, that takes forever, in the sense that you never end. You never say we're done. This is done. We can finish here. So, but this first stage of setting up culture and processes, normally it can take from, let's say, 4 to 6 months. You should be able to have a proper the embryo of the new processes and the right culture in place. It's a killer. Estimating, we know it's hard to estimate, and it's dangerous, but just to have an idea.
Perfect. Fantastic. And I believe this is the last question, at least, that we have for now. How do you deal with resistance within the team when trying to implement change?
It's it's a lock shot. I don't know if you say. Sometimes the teams are very open to the change, and are excited about the change, and want to want to participate, and that is very comforting to have there. But yes, sometimes there is a resistance. But the main thing here is, first, when you're going to go for a big transformation, you need to set the right tone from the beginning. And the tone in these sort of transformations is always, so it's not going there like a doctor to prescribe and put the shot to the patients. Or so it's more like a collaboration, and it needs to be uh, approached this way. So it's a collaboration. Everyone needs to be engaged. It's a good thing of all the agile flavors involve retrospectives, and that sort of ceremonies that have everyone on board of the team, and obviously feedback. So you need to listen, and listen.
Sounds great. And I think that's a fantastic point to end this webinar on. Thank you very much, Luis, for sharing your expertise today. I think that was very interesting. And thank you for everyone who joined us, and for the very interesting questions we also got from the audience. If you later on think of any additional questions, or you would like to explore this topic further, please feel free to reach out to us. We will also follow up with some additional content on some of the topics shared, and with the recording of this webinar in the weeks ahead. In the meantime, we wish you a very nice rest of the day, and we hope to see you at the next event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.